No, go that way.
Exit onto Crespi Drive.
Can I finally hear your ghost story, like actually?
Have I not? I told you the ghost story.
Are you filming?
Yeah.
Why?
Hey everyone, and this is Jaren from Imaging Resource, and today we're going to take a look at the brand new Panasonic GH5S, the latest from Panasonic, and quite frankly, something that we weren't really expecting so soon after the launch of the GH5. Here we're going to take a look at comparing it to the GH5 as well as a couple other cameras in its category, and really take a look at what this camera does different. You're going to be surprised how well it performs. So the GH5S doesn't do a lot different when it comes to the aesthetics of the camera. As you can see here, it does look slightly different, but that's due mainly to some red accents they've added, the S under the GH5 and the little red metallic disc underneath the control dial on the left side of the camera. You're also going to notice the record button was slightly changed again. From the GH4 to the GH5 we saw it change, and on the GH5 to the GH5S we saw it change again. Here it's a giant red dot with the REC actually printed on it. Other than that, the backside of the camera looks pretty much the same. Where you're going to see another difference is on the menu system. They did some slight tweaking to it, and the one thing that I noticed that was the big standout was here you can see changing among different recording types is now paginated, which I really like. Now we're just going to take a look at some clips I took with the camera where you can kind of just appreciate the high definition, really sharp, crisp look. And this doesn't look super different than what we saw on the GH5. In fact, side by side, and you're going to see at the end of this video, you're not going to be able to see a major difference in just pure straight up video quality in well-lit situations. It doesn't really exist, and I wasn't really expecting that. Here you can see the Vlog, which is included with this particular model, and I just put an Arri Alexa Cinema LUT over the top so you can kind of see how that changes in post-production. Now, in this clip, what I really wanted to do was take a look at how the GH5 and the GH5S compared in slow motion at high ISO. And what you'll see here is if you pay attention to the way that the cameras are treating high contrast points and sharp edges, there is a difference. Now, taking a step back, both these clips look great. I have absolutely no complaints when it comes to the quality of either of these clips, but the GH5S does look slightly better. At 12,800, which is the maximum ISO for the GH5, it looks really good, but you're going to notice noise and some slight texture muddying as well as some sharpness fall off on edges. On the GH5S, you don't get either of those, and I have to say this is some of the cleanest video I have ever seen from a camera shooting this high ISO, especially from such a small sensor that the GH5S has, which is the Micro Four Thirds. It looks really, really good. Now, speaking of ISO, that's actually what this camera does the best and what's most impressive about it. So what I did here is I compared ISO 12,800 across 3 camera models. You'll notice one is full frame. I personally think the GH5S looks the best here, and the GH5 and the 1DX Mark II share a lot in common. The 1DX Mark II, I think, has the most noise, while the GH5 has some and is less sharp than the 1DX Mark II. Both of them are, I think, less sharp and have more noise than the GH5S, which is very impressive for the new camera. The 1DX Mark II being full frame should be outperforming this camera, but doesn't. In fact, a camera with a sensor a fraction the size is performing better at the same high ISO. Now, in the next clip, I'm going to show you as high ISO as the GH5S can go, and you're going to see that it does eventually hit a limit. I find that it's best to use it only up to ISO 51,200. Beyond that, it gets really noisy, but it's still pretty impressive that this thing can basically see in the dark. So up to this point, we've really only seen what this camera can do compared to an older version of itself, and a camera that's not really a low-light camera, the 1DX Mark II. So how does it perform against a camera that has been hailed as the low-light camera, the see-in-the-dark camera, the A7S Mark II? Well, So we're going to take a look at these two cameras side by side. I only have still images to work with here from our A7S II testing. We didn't have video from the A7S II, but this should still paint a pretty accurate picture of how both cameras handle high ISO. I started both at 12,800 and I went to their maxes. From the 12,800 start all the way till about 51,200 ISO, it's my opinion that the GH5S looks slightly better. I think it has less noise, I think it has better color rendition, I think it's overall sharper. But from that point forward, it starts to become a rather half of dozen here, 6 of another there. The Panasonic GH5S has some serious noise, while the A7S II tends to instead lose sharpness and color fidelity. So it's just a matter of what is more important to you at those high ISOs. Now, the A7S II can go all the way up to 409, 600 ISO, while the GH5S can't. But honestly, I wouldn't have used that setting for either camera. It is kind of grotesque on the A7S II. If it existed in the same way on the GH5S, I wouldn't ever shoot up there anyway. In fact, both of the two high ISOs that are below that are also what I would consider unusable. At this point, I just want to talk briefly about how impressive it is that the GH5S is even competing here. The A7S II is an extremely good low-light camera, and it's a full-frame sensor. And the GH5S, in my opinion, beats it at the ISOs where they both perform in a manner that, well, looks good. So that's really something special here. Now, I'm going to end this video by showing clips from both camera, the GH5 and the GH5S, both cameras, at each of their video recording modes, just so you could kind of see how they do. And in here, you're only seeing the GH5S because these are 3 new recording modes that were added to this camera that don't exist on the GH5. That's 4K P60 that in cinema, 4K P30 cinema in 10-bit and 8-bit. Now, when this switches over and we actually get to see the GH5 next to it, you're going to notice something. The crop factor is different. Though the actual video clips themselves don't look that different, if different at all, you're going to see the GH5 looks extremely zoomed in when compared to the GH5S. Now, these were tripoded with the same lens at the same focal length, but the GH5S has done something different here than the GH5. It is wider. The crop factor is different. I don't actually know what specifically the crop factor is, what the number is, how many times it is different, but you can see it's a pretty significant backup from the GH5. Like you're gonna get way more in your frame of view. The actual quality of the footage here when you see it shot, other than the fact that one is definitely wider than the other, I don't see a huge difference in the quality of the GH5 and the GH5S when shot at ideal ISOs. They're pretty much the same camera. Where the GH5S will excel is in those high ISO situations. And now one thing else worth mentioning, the trade-off here that Panasonic made with the GH5S, it's twofold. One, it's $500 more. It's a $2,500 camera as opposed to a $2,000 camera. And the GH5S does not have in-body image stabilization like the GH5 does. So if that was really important to you, you're going to be disappointed here, because now you're going to have to pick between, would you rather have really good ISO performance and IBIS, or great ISO performance and no IBIS? That's a choice you're going to have to make, or pick up both cameras. I'm not really sure how I feel about this, and it really does change my opinion of the GH5S, but that's what it is. Thanks for watching.